What's up, everybody? Jonathan here with upwardliving.com. Today, I'm going to talk about a little bit of a touchy subject, but something that definitely needs to be addressed. I'm going to talk about division in the church and if it's okay or not. You often hear the saying, we could disagree on doctrine, but we both follow the same Jesus, so it's okay. And I'm going to tell you why that's not biblical and how we should actually think. So, there's a verse, well, actually a couple verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. A lot of people tend to quote this verse when we talk about division. A lot of people think that this verse says division is okay as long as we all have the same goal and the same motives and serving the same Jesus. But that's not at all what this verse is saying, and I'm going to read it to you and kind of explain what it means. So I'm going to read to you, it's 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 4. We'll start there. So the problem here, Paul was writing to the church at Corinth, and he was basically addressing the issue that some of the people were following Paul and some of the people were following Apollos, and there was like a division there. So Paul wanted to address it because Paul and Apollos were buddies. Paul wanted to address it, and here's what he said. He said, "For one says, I follow Paul, and the other, I follow Apollos. Are you not being merely human? What then is Apollos and what then is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth." So people say, when Paul's saying, I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, they think that's a doctrine issue. Nowhere in the entire New Testament can you find evidence that the disciples were, or the apostles were separated on any doctrine. Now we can say that, the beef that Paul and Peter had, we can say they had problems, but that was not over a doctrine issue. That was over Peter being stupid, honestly. Peter had great faith at times, but he also messed up. And to give you the backstory, he was eating with the Gentiles, and the uncircumcised came, and he didn't want to be dirty, so he left. And Paul basically said, no, don't do that, because we're supposed to eat with everyone. Pretty much paraphrasing there, but Paul corrected him. So that's when they had beef. It was never over a doctrine issue, honestly. It was over Peter being dumb. Honestly, guys, Paul was the greatest Christian to ever live, and I will say that. Paul reached thousands and thousands for Christ, and he started a movement. Without Paul, this movement really wouldn't have happened the way it did. I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened, but he really, pushed it in the right direction, because it was a tough time. The churches were dying. The churches were getting persecuted every day, and Paul was the one that really rode to these churches and gave them strength and the encouragement to persevere. So Paul was amazing. He really was. He even said, be imitators of me, for I am of Christ. He really put himself on that pedestal because he lived in a way that was holy. He lived in a way that, he was sound in his doctrine. So in these verses, he was not at all saying that it's okay for doctrines to be different or for there to be division with doctrine. That's not all what he was saying. He was saying, just because I plant the seed and Apollos waters, that does not mean that one is greater than the other. And that was the issue, because people were like, oh man, Paul's greater because he planted the seed. But they're like, no, Apollos is better because, he added the water. You can't have a seed grow without water. Then people are like, oh, but you can't have, there won't be any growth without that seed. But newsflash, neither of them would happen without God. You can't just put a seed down, water it, and expect it to grow. It wouldn't necessarily grow, but God did it. God gave the growth. So that verse was not at all about a division of doctrine, and just because there are different denominations of Christianity does not mean that's a good thing. But yeah, that's the first verse I have to share with you. It's not division. It's simply, him addressing the how did he word it? He said, are you not being merely human? It's the flesh's response to that. They were saying, oh, but one's greater than the other. No, neither of them are significant really, because God's the one that supplies the growth. Ultimately, that's the one that should be praised. So yeah, I mean, he called their thinking merely human. He didn't go against Apollos whatsoever. Apollos and Paul actually went together. They met up to make sure that their doctrine was the same, along with Barnabas, and I'm sure along with others that weren't mentioned, but I'm sure a lot of the apostles met up. Um, Paul actually writes about his encounter with that. Um, he said in Galatians chapter 2. I'll read from verse 1. We'll go 1 and 2. Um, he said, then after 14 years, I went again to Jerusalem with Barnabas. So, Paul went to Jerusalem, and he had a mission. And he also said, taking Timothy or Titus along with me. So it was Barnabas, Paul, and Titus. So that's 3. Okay, all have major impacts within the church. And he said, I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately before those who seemed influential. He said, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles. So he's talking about the doctrine that he had, the way he approached it, the way he said it, the attitude, the theology behind it. Every aspect of the way he presented the gospel, he talked about. And he said, in order to make sure I was not running or had not run in vain. So Paul, he literally goes out of his way to make sure that he says that I was not running in vain or had not run in vain or anything. When he said in another part of the Bible, be imitators of me, for I am of Christ. So Paul had zero pride about the way he carried out doctrine. See, the issue is we have division in the church. We have certain denominations because of pride. We follow the feelings of the flesh instead of the feelings of the spirit. See, we should live by our faith and not by the flesh's feelings. So the problem is we get so prideful in the way that we think. We get so prideful in saying, oh, we're right, instead of, having discussions and possibly being wrong. We're so scared of being wrong. We should be more scared of offending the Creator instead of us being wrong about an issue. Because, for the good of the gospel, we should really put aside our pride. Because I think it's a scarier thing to fall into the hands of the living God than to have our pride be the ruler of our lives. So, he made sure he went to Jerusalem with Titus and with Barnabas. So Jerusalem, there were other apostles there as well. They met and they made sure that the way that they were presenting the gospel, the way that they were running, and everything about their Christian walk, all the doctrines they had, all of the approaches they used were of unity. See, denominations are just man's attempt to understand the Bible, when the Bible really doesn't need much interpretation. It really doesn't. We literally can just read it as written. See, Paul, he loved doctrine. He tackled it. And when somebody did something wrong, like Peter, he addressed it. There's a way to go about doing it. There's a way in love to do it. But we allow feelings to rule in our lives. We allow the fear of being wrong to rule in our lives. We say, it's okay for them to think that way because they're following the same Jesus, when in reality that is not the case. They may be following the same Jesus, but when the world is looking at us, when they're looking at the church, and they see all these denominations, just saying, what unity? How can you guys be following the same Jesus when you all have different doctrines? That doesn't make sense to me. And that's what the world will say, and rightfully so. We should be unified under Christ. We should be unified, and we should allow all our doctrines to be interpreted by the Bible. Okay, that's the only way we can do it. Once we start getting off that and start going into human reasoning, that's where the issue comes up. Every major doctrine issue we can solve through the Bible. I do believe that. There is no evidence whatsoever within the New Testament that any of the apostles ever disagreed, or at least for a long amount of time before they talked about it. Instead, there's evidence that they met up and talked about it, and talked about the doctrine that they were presenting to make sure it was the same. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope, we can start breaking down these walls and start, becoming unified under Christ. So I hope you guys like and subscribe for more. Like this video, tell your friends, and yeah, guys, peace out.